it's probably more important, and to the victims that I spoke to, people who were supporters of Nahda, the Islamist party, who were imprisoned just for their political beliefs for years and tortured on the basis of that, actually having a legitimate electoral process and the chance to vote for a constituent assembly and the chance to change the institutions and the laws and the constitution that were responsible, the structural issues, in other words, that were responsible for the mass human rights violations that occurred. That is more important than having people held accountable. And in fact, Ben Ali probably won't. He's in Saudi Arabia right now, and I'm sure he won't be extradited. So I think that it's a combination of all of these. I mean, the legal process is important, but so is the talking process and healing those wounds. So is changing institutional changes, changing political culture, changing the structural issues. Sorry.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Sorry. Thank you, Phil. I'll pick up on your question, and I think the gentleman at the back has actually summed up very well what lots of the Spanish discourse of the victims is. He said to me that it's justice, that it's a matter of recognition of truth for the victims in the country, that the rest of the people know what happened. And Carla said something that was really interesting when she said about justice is also about dealing with the cloud of suspicion, because there is this need for the victims that were for 40 years were portrayed as common criminals, as horrific, diabolic. Yes. So thank you. So. Yes, but also we have been made to believe in Spain that justice is not possible. Justice is not possible because most of the perpetrators are dead, most of the victims are dead, something that is not true. Most of the perpetrators during the Civil War are dead. There were 40 years of repression after that those people are still there, some of them with very good state pensions. But I think some of the victims are actually looking as well to dig into some of the, breaking this stigmatization and some of the issues that have never been talked about or have been talked about less, such as sexual violence in jails, such as the issue of the repression of women and their through undignifying processes such as parading them naked after having forced a massive amount of laxatives around, parading them in the villages, called the pelonas, because they shave their head. The stolen babies, this is very important. It's actually becoming an international issue now. The estimates that 30,000, this is supposed to be quite high estimates. Some historians are doubting this. 30,000 children were stolen from their mothers in prisons and from the Franco authorities and given away to families that couldn't have children or family. By the Franco authorities. By the Franco authorities. As in an attempt to actually, there were some theories that communism was actually something that you had to save the children from. Therefore, the Catholic Church had an immense complicity in this, and this is one of the issues that actually are needed. But I'm not saying that victims don't want justice. There's a group of people who are actually trying to pursue universal jurisdiction in other courts. For example, Argentina might serve as justice for Franco's victims, which we're all really watching at that possibility. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
So again, I'm the last one, so I'm.
Sorry.
So I'm just going to try to be very brief and just 3 comments. So the question that Phil asked, and I think it's a really difficult question, but I'm glad you asked. And I think the question is, as Corinna was saying, it really depends on each case, but I think within each case, it also depends who you talk to. And that's my experience in Argentina and Uruguay, because if you talk to the victims, to the direct victims, what they want is definitely trials. That's the sort of utopian goal, and at least it was for many years. But that is followed by truth. And I think it's particularly important in the case of Argentina because the crime of disappearance is based on the denial of the truth and the denial of the lives of the human beings that were disappeared. So in the case of Argentina, the need to expose the truth was an important step in the recognition of the crime, because the state for many years denied. There are so many thousands of habeas corpus petitions that were submitted in Argentina, and the government always responded by saying, these individuals are not in our custody. So I think truth was also a very important goal for the victims. But then if you talk to sort of human rights organizations, a sort of equivalent of Amnesty in the local context, they also call for reparations and compensations and institutional reforms and these other alternative forms of justice. And talking about reparation, I wanted to make a comment about the cultural problem in Iran. And I'm very interested to hear that, because in Argentina they had the same cultural problem, because you had a very big division even within the human rights organizations, where you had one group of the mothers where they said very clearly, we are not accepting this blood money. We'll never sell the blood of our children. We will never accept compensation by the state that took away our children from us. And then you had other human rights, different group of the mothers and other direct victims that accepted the money and used it at a time of impunity to actually finance trials overseas that were really costly. So they took the money from the state to actually further their quest for justice. But they had very similar issues, a similar problem of accepting what was perceived as blood money. And just finally, on the double nationality trials, it is true that trial in absentia have a different impact, maybe only symbolic impact. But in the case of Argentina, it was very interesting, because the military then came out and said, well, actually, we would like to be tried in Argentina if we really have to be tried anywhere. They didn't want to be tried outside, mainly because they had more lenient sentences in Argentina and so on. So somehow you had sort of an effect that was unexpected, and it was still sort of positive for the quest for justice.
All right. Thank you very much. And I think if you could all join me to thank our panelists for very, very insightful presentations. And now we'll be going to the common room for some very well-earned drinks and a very important award ceremony. But I think Phil's going to close with some brief closing remarks.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to delay you any longer, because I know you've been here a very long time. It's always very difficult, I think, to try and sort of wrap up an event like this, because there have been so many things said and so many different components to it. I think we've heard some very important things in terms of the harm that's been committed in 1988 and the long-term impact that that's had. I think one of the interesting themes that's come out in the discussions today is we call the event a quest for justice, and I think that's a crucial part of what we're talking about, but perhaps the quest for memory and acknowledgement is as important. And I think that's come out in the testimonies that we heard from witnesses and victims this morning, that we've seen, I think, in many of the discussions as the day has gone on, that justice is one component, but these issues of memory and acknowledgement are absolutely vital as well. And I think it's in that context that we should see the importance of the Boroumand Foundation report, that in and of itself, as a form of memorialisation, as a form of capturing testimony of people who went through these events in 1988, that the report is vital in and of itself. But also it clearly lays a basis for all of the other issues that we've talked about today, particularly in terms of justice and issues of redress. And I think we've heard a very wide range of debates about what that redress can look like. And I think we've probably covered the entire landscape of options. It seems to me there are 8, 9, 10 possible avenues, possible mechanisms that could be used. I think it's been a very realistic and a very sober discussion. I think we've discussed the limitations of all of those avenues. But I think Wolfgang said something very interesting, which was we shouldn't just let sort of realism dictate affairs, that there is a scope for innovation, creativity, that the options that we've talked about might not necessarily be the only avenues available. There may be new avenues that can be opened if the right actors operate in the right kind of framework and at the appropriate time. So we shouldn't also close off these options. It's been a crucial discussion, I think, not just to recognise how important that report is, but I think also to give a sense of where things could potentially go from here. It would be remiss of me not to thank a few people very, very publicly for today, even before we get to the awards ceremony. Firstly, just from OTJR's point of view, I really do want to thank the Boroumand Foundation for the incredible work that you're doing, and also for inviting us to be a part of today and your work as a whole, and also to Jeffrey and his chambers, who were clearly essential to everything that happened here. ABF and your whole team, I think, really have been remarkable. You've tolerated OTJR's and Oxford's strange ways of doing things, and organising an event over multiple continents in different time zones. And I was in northern Uganda and eastern Congo for a lot of the email exchanges we were having. So logistically, this is not a straightforward event to organise. But to Ladan and Roya and to Krista and Lydia in particular, thank you for your patience with us, and may your very good work continue. To all of our speakers, and crucially to our translators and interpreters, thank you for your remarkable work. Clearly, in a multilingual context like this, translators play an absolutely central role, so we're very grateful for the work that you've done. We haven't mentioned it explicitly from the front today, but of course the art exhibitions have been a vital part, I think, of everything that's going on here. So many thanks to those who produced the artwork and were responsible for bringing it all here, in particular to Roya, Nazila and Binesh for doing that. We're very, very grateful. To all of you for being here as the general audience, again, particularly those of you who we know have travelled a very, very long way, and those of you for whom we know that these are very, very personal issues. These are not academic debates. You've lived through these things. You wrestle with them day to day. We're very grateful for you coming here and participating in these discussions. The final set of thank yous is for my own OTJR team, who I don't think can ever be thanked enough for how much work they do in Oxford on these issues of transitional justice. So in particular to Emily, to Nikki, to Jan, Rudina, Rebecca and Lionel, who again you probably haven't seen because they've been scurrying around doing all sorts of bits and pieces for today. They're the kind of often all too invisible people who actually make these things happen. Again, a massive thank you to you for the work that you've done. Please do not let me delay you anymore. We're going to have the awards ceremony and the drinks reception in the common room to our right.